All right, everybody. This week we're going to finish up the digestive system. So the first part, we're just going over some basics of the structures, some of the overall functionings, kind of broad level stuff. Now we're going to get real specific, and we're going to look at each individual organ and learn about their functions. So we're going to start off with digestive part two. Right. So the first of the structures we're going to look at is the pharynx. I've always liked the name pharynx because it kind of reminds me of like a cross between pharaoh and sphinx, which I'm a big fan of ancient Egypt, so I enjoy that word. I don't know, always brings me back to those thoughts. But the pharynx is something we've learned about before. When we actually just had a practical about it, we had to learn those different sections of the pharynx, right? So you have the naso, oro, and laryngo. Well, food passes through the oro and the laryngo sections, and so it allows. I think that was in the last practical. I don't know. But anyway, it's on some test. But yeah, so and the oro, one that nears the mouth, and the laryngo that goes down meets it right before the split, where you have the esophagus going one way, trachea going the other way. But so during those areas, food and fluids pass through, but also air passes through. So remember, the pharynx has a lot of things that pass through. The esophagus is the special tube you have just for food and fluids and sometimes gas, like if you belch or something like that. And so remember the trachea has like that long cartilaginous rings around it, so it's always open. The esophagus is more flat because it only needs to expand when food is going down it, and so there's no real structure there to hold it open. So it's a flat tube, and so it's harder to find in dissections. But there's some pictures. You saw that in lab, yeah. And so that's a thing. And so, but yeah, it just collapses when there's food. It's actively involved with moving of food throughout the system. So it's just a big little tube. That's it. So one of the things that pops up though in the pharynx, does it go in the esophagus, is heartburn. Now I am a frequent sufferer of the heartburn. It is not a fun time. I'm not gonna lie. I take medicine for it now, and it mostly helps. But yeah, so there's a variety of causes. Usually it depends, but essentially what happens is it's a burning sensation. Sometimes it can feel like you're having a heart attack at times. It's not pleasant, but you have excess acid from the stomach going to the esophagus. Now, one of the things when you look at the tissue of the linings is there's differences. The stomach has adaptations to deal with that acid. The esophagus does not. Therefore, it bothers the esophagus, doesn't the stomach. Long-term exposure to this can lead to the cancer of the system. The esophageal cancer is a concern. But this is one of the first symptoms of GERD, which I have. I have that, so that's fantastic and amazing. It can be caused by a few things. It really just depends. So if we get super full, for me it seems to be very food heavy, with various triggers like sodas can cause it if I drink a bunch of those. Chocolate can cause it. Definitely tomato-based foods can cause it. A lot of acid foods, so even like apples or oranges can mess me up a little bit. It's very unfortunate. That's some of my favorite things to eat, but oh well. But yeah, you can also just have like exercise can cause it too, right? And so like tons of things can cause the issues. And so you just gotta manage it and deal with it. You can have flaps. Sometimes one of the sphincters can go wrong on you, and it doesn't close properly. So yeah, pretty insane. It sucks. I'm not gonna lie, it sucks. Um, but yeah, so again, and also high fatty foods can do it too. So foods that have to stay in the stomach longer, because what happens is you have all this food in there and it stays in. It takes it a while. The acid stays through, so it can get. And also, foods that create a lot of gas open up the sphincter and cause it to escape into the esophagus. But yeah, so it can be a rough time. I'm not gonna lie. It's not amazing. It can also be caused by a hernia too. If you have part of the stomach protrudes above the diaphragm, it's kind of cut off a little bit and you can't close it right. So that could be another cause. Who knows? Maybe I got one of those things, but I don't know. They want me to do a endoscopy, which is a test to where they actually stick a tube down your throat, and it's kind of like a reverse colonoscopy, honestly. And so see what's going on. I might get one done eventually. I probably will get one done eventually to see what's going on. But yeah, it's fantastic. Anyway, so now I still do eat some of those things. I just try to do it in moderation, except for chili. I really can't have chili anymore. That's very unfortunate. Anyway, so going back to more positive things, there's probably some questions for you to think about when it comes to heartburn. I think it's kind of cool. It's very good, practical, uh, knowledge of the system, and so it's just kind of neat to have. My grandfather had heartburn a lot, and I'm still talking about heartburn on the next slide. I'm sorry, but I remember when I was a kid, and I hang out with him. He'd always be going on about his heartburn. He would just eat like rolls and rolls of Rolaids, which are these things that are supposed to do with heartburn. He would just eat them by the pack. Uh, so I always remember laughing at him, and I'd hear him, and they're like, "Oh, my heartburn." But now I fully understand everything he went through. Oh man, brutal, brutal. So yeah, I get it entirely. So I guess it runs in the family. So great, things to look forward to. But going back to this section, so the pharynx and esophagus, main job, passage of food. That's it. All right. There's no real like digestion processes or that happening. It's just moving things down. So the major function here is just to swallow the food down and push it through. Muscles are involved in that. There are two phases of it. So let's take a. But well, we're not going to go too far in depth with it. So yeah, you're welcome. If you have a small rounded mass of like a food at the moment of swallowing, that's called a bolus. BOLUS. Little fun fact for the day. Boom, take it. Now the next organ up, the stomach. The stomach is all about being able to store and expand to hold the food in that you take, and then from there you can begin the chemical breakdown of some of those food items. So what's in there can release some fun little acids, release some fun little enzymes, and start to tear that food up. And so you've already began that process by hopefully chewing food beforehand, depending on what you eat, I suppose. And so it converts that bolus that we see here into more of a paste called chyme, and then is what gets released into the small intestines. If you have an empty stomach, the volume, you can see the average volume, but it can expand greatly as you eat, and so that's pretty impressive. And so the stomach has physical structures that allow for that change, and it makes sense. If you don't have anything in it, it doesn't really make sense to have the volume that high expanded. It needs to be able to expand for what it's eating, and so otherwise you'd have to have so much more acid being released, or maybe just it would be tougher to navigate around inside the stomach that food. So if it's empty, you'll see folds. So in the bottom left picture, you can see like little indentations in it. That's the rugae, which are the folds. So they do have it. It's not the only structure we'll talk about that has the rugae, but it's one of them. And so if you run like one of the things with like food trainers is I remember like competitive eating type stuff. You have to like train the stomach and get better at it. And they're like trying to make it as empty as possible or fill it up with water or something. There's some various strategies in it, but it's pretty impressive. Anyway, major parts of the stomach, you can see them here. It's broken down into a few different sections. Who knew that the stomach had some specific names for them, each one of these parts, but hey, they're there. Pyloric is there, so it's one that actually leaves the stomach and goes into the small intestines, so I just think pyloric is kind of a cool structure. Pylorus. So and so there's sphincters. There's one near the end that goes into the esophagus. And there's also ones that goes out the pylorus. And so, yeah, you got a couple of those puppies. You can see the rugae. Another unique structural adaptation for the stomach is it has 3 layers of muscle instead of just 2. So that's a big difference. So it's got a circular layer, oblique layer, and a longitudinal layer. Other organs in the intestinal tract don't have all 3 of those. They just have one. There's also some curvatures. One's big, it's called the greater. One's small, it's called the lesser. Makes sense. Here's an actual person stomach. It doesn't look as glamorous as it does maybe in the pictures, but you can see some parts, and the shape of them can vary depending on what was in there. One of the cool things with dissecting other organisms is you can cut open the stomach and see what's in there. So I've cut open sharks before, and like inside have been fish, pet fish heads, fish pieces that they'd eaten. It's just kind of neat. Other times it's a bunch of grossness and it looks hideous. So anyway, the greater curvature is the one that's the bigger curve of it, so it covers the lateral side of it. The lesser is the one on the more medial side of the stomach, facing up towards the liver. There are mesenteries that extend from these and connect the stomach to the other organs. And so there's a lesser omentum that's part of this. and it runs from the lesser curvature to the liver to try and hold these things kind of in place. 'Cause, I mean, the stomach's expanding a lot, so like it helps to have something kind of centered and spot, to keep it where it's going. And so the omentum is just a fold of the peritoneum that just connects these things to each other. So there's a lesser omentum, and this is going to be a greater omentum. So big curves. Uh, the, the the baseball player in the past live, that was Sandy Koufax, who was known for having a great curveball. So that's why that was there, in case you're wondering. Another omentum is the greater omentum, and that goes over the other side and drapes inferiorly. I like the way that's phrased. It's kind of neat. So it covers a lot of those other organs and connects those with each other, and it blends in with the mesocolon, which is a mesentery that is involved with large intestines. So it just kind of connects together to try and tie these things up in a unit. And you remember when you cut these things open in rats and pigs before, like how it's just kind of one big mass, and you just kind of pull it out, and you have to like slowly, teeth it away from each other, and tease it away from each other and pull them apart because they have all these structures to keep them together. All right, so the stomach wall, it's got the 4 layers that we talked about last week that are common in the GI tract, right? And so you have mucosa, submucosa, all that stuff, right? And so stomach has those too. One of the differences, though, and this we're going to look at for every system, is how these layers are modified. So the muscularis layer and the mucosal layer are the big modified ones for the stomach. The muscularis externa layer has circular and longitudinal muscle, but also has that third layer to it, which is the oblique layer. And this makes sense because the stomach needs all those extra muscles because it's moving around all this food. So it's trying to go through and kind of stir the pot, so to speak, and break these things apart, and help break down the actual food. So pummel it to pieces. You need muscle to do so, right? So I mean, it makes sense the stomach would have this. It's a very logical sort of adaptation to have. And it's also a very, in terms of the other adaptations the stomach has, it needs protection against living in this hot, lava-filled environment almost, right? So in Ocarina of Time, a very great game from back in the day, this is what the picture is in the bottom. You had to get a special tunic to wear to protect you from these harsh conditions. And if you remember, these layers are called tunics, right? So you have a special tunic the stomach wears, quote unquote, to help it deal with the harsher environment. So that's kind of neat. But yeah, so the mucosal layer modified up, and so it has a simple columnar epithelium to it. This is in contrast to the esophagus, which is stratified squamous. So this is definitely different, and it makes mucus cells, or it has mucus cells to make and secrete mucus. And so the mucus it secretes is an alkaline mucus, which makes sense because it's a very acidic environment. And so you want to have that alkaline with it try and protect against that, and it helps, with that function. And so there's also these gastric pits in there that have gastric glands, which produce the gastric juice, which is the acidic stuff used for breaking things down. So you have a part of this layer that will make a mucus to try and protect the organ. And then you have another part of it which makes the actual juice of the organ that it uses to break things down. I want to point out that that glass is not full of gastric juice, actually. I don't know what it actually looks like, but I'm sure it's pretty disgusting. And so here's the anatomy of the stomach. And so there's definitely some parts here, so you can see the 4 layers that are present. Muscularis, mucosa, those are the big ones to worry about here, and their differences. Structurally, you got these pits, gastric pits, right? Inside of there, specialized cells. So we're going to look at those. And so you actually get at the uniqueness of the stomach. So there's a few gland cells we're going to look at. So these are involved with the production of the gastric juice. And so some of these include the following cells that you see there. So endocrine cells are involved, have some endocrine type functions to them. And so they're involved with hormone release that actually helps stimulates the pancreas, liver, gallbladder, and some other stuff. So they have some roles. But we're going to look at all 3 of these and see their functions and see what's going on. So here's a zoomed in version of the picture. And here you can see some of those individual cells pointed out and where they're found. So it's kind of neat. These are just kind of scattered about. In one of the models for the lab, hopefully you got to see pictures of those, you can kind of see some of these pointed out. And so this is very much like, okay, this makes the stomach the stomach. It's got these structures to it, these cells to it, to provide their special function. Let's start off with the mucous neck cells. And so these are ones that secrete a thin acidic mucus of an unknown function. So yeah, it makes a mucus. So I mean, if it's a thin acidic mucus, I mean, you might think it helps with the digestive process in some way, but who knows? You know, there's still a lot of up in the air there. And then you also have parietal cells. So these are the ones that actually reach the hydrochloric acid. Check out the pH on that thing. So that's a low pH, all right, very acidic. And it helps break down proteins, activates pepsin to help break down proteins, and helps break down plant cell walls, and kills bacteria, right? Because who knows what you're eating? I mean, you'd like to think it's good, right? But I mean, even the best prepared food can have some bacteria on it. So again, you don't jack you up. So having some protein around actually helps, this acid do its function. And so that can be a benefit. Well, it's just how it works. So proteins are broken down heavily in the spot. And so you actually need some proteins to actually absorb vitamin B12 in the small intestine. So you got to make sure you get some of that. So that's one of the secretions that's made here. And so you have to have that secreted to actually allow full absorption of materials later on in the system. So what we see is these organs can affect each other along the path. So the stomach has effects on the small intestines and so on and so forth. And so the picture of the rabbit is there because my mom planted, I might have told this before, and if so, I do apologize, but my mom planted some flowers once back in the day. And she was really proud of this tulips she's been growing. And then the next morning, woke up, went outside to admire her flowers in the fresh morning glow of the day, and all the tulip flower pretty parts were gone because the rabbits had come down and eaten them. So she learned a harsh lesson about animals being hungry and how it can devastate your garden. But that was always pretty funny. I've never forgotten that. And that was a while ago now, but that was great. And so the bunny made use of its hydrochloric acid in its stomach to break down those plant cell walls of those flowers and get some stuff out of it. Because bunnies be crazy. Bunnies also eat their own poop, though, so maybe not the best role model. All right. So another cell, the chief cell. These secrete pepsinogen, and so this is an enzyme that is activated and becomes pepsin by hydrochloric acid and also pepsin itself. And so this helps break down proteins into polypeptides, so breaking them down into amino acids, so it can actually be absorbed and used by the body. And they also have lipases here, which are used for breaking down lipids. And so we also have some lipid breakdown that occurs inside the stomach. And fattier foods in general take a little bit longer to go through the stomach. So that's why, heartburn can be made worse by excess fatty foods in those areas. The bottom left is the chief himself, Master Chief. And Pepsi is not the best soda. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I mean, I understand you may have some Pepsi fans out there, but I don't know. Coca-Cola, it's also my go-to. I love me some Coke. Love me some Coke, natural sugar, Dr. Pepper. It's not really Coke related. I've been to Coke World in Atlanta. It's a fun time. I almost got sick. I wanted to throw up from drinking all the flavors optional. So if you ever go to Coke World in Atlanta, it's pretty fun. At least they had it this way. Who knows, with things changing. But you could actually go through and try every type of product they offer across the world. So all these different countries. And it's more than just like, oh, this is Coke, but it has like, a different name to it. It's like a whole different product. And some of that stuff just does not taste good. And so, I mean, I don't like Coke Vanilla. I think that tastes awful. But I went through my first time through, and like one of the challenges is to drink everything at once. Or not at once, but like go through and try a little bit of everything. And I did so, and I felt awful. I thought I was going to die in the car ride back. But I made it. So, and then I wonder why my heartburn is the way it is. So maybe if I hadn't eaten that way, maybe it would have been better. I don't know. But, it is what it is. I'm not a Pepsi fan though. I mean, I've had Pepsi before. I remember I collected my Star Wars cans that had the Pepsi stuff on them. That was alright. But I don't know. Mountain Dew was okay, but it's just too much sugar in it, man. And outside of that, Sierra Mist, my favorite Pepsi product. But yeah, Sierra Mist, Sprite, and go hand in hand with. Anyway, here's some of the cells being shown. So we can actually see the pepsinogen pepsin process with hydrochloric acid playing a key role. So note, we have some cells that make hydrochloric acid, some that make pepsinogen, release that. So again, cells working together for the greater functioning of the system. And so that's very much in play here. All right. So let's talk about this stomach mucosal barrier. So mucus helps protect the stomach from the harsh conditions of the stomach. I mean, it's kind of, like, okay, we're coming up with a solution to a problem we create, but we need this problem to actually be able to process the food that we're eating, right? So it's a necessary problem. We're trying to come up with a way to deal with it. And luckily, we have the stomach as this one isolated spot that can deal with all this and then not, get destroyed in the process, at least ideally. Um, so yeah, but there's a few things that go through and contribute to this mucosal barrier. One is it has a base-rich mucus, which again, going back to our basics of pH, you want it to be more basic instead of acidic, so you can counteract the acidicness to it. There are tight junctions between the cells, and so this is important because it prevents any sort of acid from seeping into the tissues. So instead, it's like, all right, no, just the outer layers are placed or just there, and that's exposed, but nothing on the inside, right? Firm outer boundary. So it's like if you go to like an X-ray machine or something, like you want to have a nice firm protected area to where that one spot's in trouble, but everything else outside of that is fine, right? Tight junctions prevent it from spreading, and then. Um, those epithelial cells that are exposed, those are constantly replaced by stem cells, and so those surface cells are replaced, every few days. So when they're being exposed, they're taking one for the team, but they're getting replaced steadily. But then they're allowing nothing to get past them. So you shall not pass from your, a wicked acid contents of the stomach into your actual tissues, which is fantastic, right? So get that to happen. So, one thing that comes up with stomach is ulcers, and so I've actually been under the suspicion that I may have an ulcer, honestly, for a while, because it can cause some of the symptoms that I feel from time to time, and like those are things that cause those. I mean, who knows? But anyway, one of the things with ulcers are there's erosions in the stomach wall, so some sort of sore. And so it can lead to some sort of, it can lead to hemorrhaging, so blood leaving where it needs to be. It can lead to an infection of disease there. But most of these are actually caused by Helicobacter pylori. So, hey, there's that pylori again. And it can be caused by using various medications for headaches and stuff, which I actually take a good bit of, because I get a lot of sinus headaches. And so it's like, oh man, maybe I got an ulcer. Maybe that's the problem with my heartburn. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I just have, an ulcer. But there was actually a very cool story about this. So back in the 80s, they were really trying to explore more about ulcers, and the conventional wisdom was caused by stress. Now, stress can make things worse for sure, and can, possibly lead to, increased likelihood of ulcers. But a couple doctors were like, no, we think it's more than that. And so these scientists were working on it and tried to come up with some hypotheses and show people, hey, we don't think it's this, we think it's bacteria. People laughed them out of town. It's like, no, man, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, it's bacteria, smacteria, right? It's stress all day long. And so, to prove a point and show that bacteria actually caused it, one of those scientists drank the bacteria and gave himself an ulcer by doing so, and then did a biopsy from it to show that it was caused by that, and did a sampling and just proved it. So he literally took it and gave it himself and proved to the world that, like, no, I took this, it gave me an ulcer, it's caused by bacteria, here you go. And then for their efforts, they won a Nobel Prize. But like that's one of the definite like, oh no, I know 100% this is what does it type of move. So that was bold. Not recommended. Don't do it. Oh, sorry. Sorry for the yawn. On top is an example of the actual bacterium. It's kind of cute. And here they are there, hanging out. The little bacteria inside the mucosal layer of the stomach. Oh no, ulcers. Most common cause of ulcers, right? Okay, so recap real quick. We've talked about a variety of cell types, right? Make sure you know those types, right? Mucous neck, parietal, chief cells. So what things they do, what their main jobs are, and then also you should understand how the stomach is modified, right? So how is it different from that general plan we looked at last week about the tissue structure? What layers are modified, how are they modified, why are they modified? Be able to tell those apart from their systems. So that's just for the recapping the stomach. All right, so now let's look at some digestive processes of the stomach. How does this joker work? And so there's a few processes carried out by the stomach. So let's see. One of it is it breaks down food. That's bold, right? Because who would have guessed it breaks down food, and also is a big storage area of food. It holds food, and it carries the products of what it makes into the small intestines, right? One long continuous tube. It helps break down proteins, so you can actually get them into polypeptides, which can actually be used by the body. And then it has enzymatic activity made possible via pepsin that helps deal with the proteins that are there. And then there are some lipid soluble products that are absorbed into the blood in this spot. So you can see where that can take place here. And so about 20% of the alcohol consumed is absorbed in the stomach, and about 80% is in the small intestines, if you're curious. Aspirin is the same deal, where it's absorbed by both. By both of those things. And so the another thing it does is is involved with the vitamin B12 absorption, which we talked about before, and you need this red blood cells to mature. And this is the only one, kind of in a way, necessary for life, even though you have to eat to be alive, right? But this is kind of like a weird technicality. It's like, well, the only essential thing it does is allowing those stupid blood cells to get what they need. But other than that, who really needs to eat? I do. I love to eat. Had some pizza for lunch. It was okay. Okay, so now let's look at how the stomach can regulate secretions, right? We have this big expandable space. We eat foods. Gases are made, and if you not gases, juices are made, and so you can actually the mucosa secretes about 3 liters of gastric juice per day. That's a lot of juice. Like that is a ton of juice. Like, can you imagine eating or drinking like 3 liters of like a soda or something a day? Like that's a bit much. I mean, when I was younger, I'd eat like maybe a 2 liter, but I mean then like that's a lot of soda. Sometimes at trivia, I would pound away some soda. The one time I drank like 6 glasses of soda. That was a lot. I did not feel good after that. I felt I was wired the rest of the day. And into the evening, I was up to about 3 a.m. I think that day. That's not something I like to do. I'm pretty sure I had work the next day too. But anyway, what regulates this thing? One of these is the nervous system. So that plays a role in regulating gastric juices. So the vagus nerve and the sympathetic nervous system are involved with this. Vagus nerve, if you remember, is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, right? Rest and digest. It's involved with secretion of the juice, which makes sense. You're trying to rest and digest. So at that point, you want to, well, let's release some of these things, right? Release some juices out. So you can actually process the food that we're eating. Meanwhile, the sympathetic, part of fight or flight, right? And so you don't need to digest food because you're trying to stay alive. While we're going to digest food for tomorrow that may never come. So you got to stay alive in that moment of panic. So it will decrease the secretion of those juices. So I guess if you want to make sure you want to maximize your food digesting ability, don't get freaked out or something. I guess that kind of makes sense. Also, hormones. And so there's some hormones that are involved with this process too. So gastrin is one of those, and it secretes the release of enzymes and hydrochloric acid. So it helps favor the process of digestion and getting those juices to be released. Meanwhile, if you have an antagonist in some way to gastrin, well, then those will inhibit that. And so the small intestines can have some of those. And so this can be the case where the intestines may fill up, and so the stomach is now empty. And so the small intestines release these antagonists to try and tell the stomach, it's like, okay, listen, you got nothing left, buddy. Like, slow it down. You don't need that juice anymore. So that way you don't, lower the acidity of the stomach, so it doesn't just stay high and continue making acid if there's nothing there. And then, like, if you have all that excess acid, it needs to go somewhere. It would go into the small intestines. That can be painful, right, and not good for the small intestines. So we don't really, need that. All of this stuff I think makes sense. It flows logically. It's like, okay, I see where this is coming from, right? It's not that bad. Just learn the terms with it. All right. So gastric secretions. There's a few phases which these are released. So let's look at these things. These 3 phases. And so one of the phases of gastric secretions is it's released kind of before food enters the stomach. So maybe you're just thinking about some food, or if you're chewing some food, you're smelling some food, you're thinking about food, right? Any of those things. You're starting to just, I don't know, just eat a Starburst or something, and you just have it in your mouth, or a Jolly Rancher or something, right? A piece of hard candy. You let it wait till it just, goes away. I don't know. I haven't had a Jolly Rancher in a long time. But yeah, so it's kind of like that. And so that's the first phase. This is the phallic phase. So you're just kind of thinking about food, and the stomach is going to start doing its thing. When you think about, oh man, I can't wait to get home and make them cookies. Oh man, it's going to be so good. It's like some mac and cheese. I'm hoping to make a cheesecake soon. So, oh man, it definitely makes my stomach. I start to release some stuff there as I get hyped for some cheesecake. The next phase, though, is the actual gastric phase, and this is where the actual gastric juice is released with food being in the actual stomach. And so this can last a few hours. It's usually kind of the pathway for how long food will stay around the stomach. It's about 4 hours or so. And so this is where most of the gastric juice is released. What stimulates its release in this phase is various chemical stimuli. And so if you have like some proteins that are not quite fully broken down, caffeine can do it. If you have low acidity, that will lead to gastric phase being released, so more juice being released, and also lead to cells releasing that hormone gastrin, which causes more juice to be released. So if you have any of those sort of conditions going on or things that are happening, that'll lead to more juice secretion. Especially naturally with caffeine, it probably goes hand in hand with a soda, which is already naturally acidic, for making me release more acid. It's neat. Green peas, shown on the previous slide, one of my favorite things to eat. Also, some wings. I love me some wings. I'm probably going to have some wings tonight when I watch WrestleMania Part 2. I watched last night, Part 1 last night, and it was okay. The end match was pretty fun. It was two people just beating each other in some graveyard, quote unquote. And it was entertaining as all get out for how insanely ludicrous it was. But speaking of ludicrous, stimulating the gastric phase continues on. And so when you have gastrin being released, that initiates hydrochloric acid to be released in the parietal cells and then gets those enzymes going. And then, all right, now we got something cooking here, almost literally. I can actually go through, break apart some proteins. And so it happens. And so, and then also as part of this process, when you have some of these proteins coming in, it causes the pH to rise, and that causes more gastrin release to lower the pH to fully, get those things going. So it kind of, it all makes sense. So pH triggers can be another thing that causes more juice to be released. And then if you have too low of a pH inside the stomach, that'll inhibit the gastric secretion because, there's limits, right? You don't want to go too acidic with it. You want to keep it in a nice, healthy spectrum. And so this is what actually occurs between meals to slower it down. It's like, okay, we want to, try to keep this under control. Sorry, apologies for the yawn. The cat here got to me. It was napping. And so I guess I'm between meals. So I'm having a low pH that's inhibiting my gastrin secretion. And so this is also a negative feedback mechanism. It's just part of the digestion process. All right, another phase of releasing gastric stuff is the intestinal phase. And so this is where it comes into the intestines. So it starts off kind of like, okay, we're in here. Let's keep it rolling. So partially digested food enters the small intestines. And so that'll cause a brief stimulatory effect, causing gastrin to be released, leading to more stomach stuff doing its thing, and it encourages the stomach to continue, making things and releasing their products. It's very encouraging for them. But this is brief though. This doesn't happen for a long period of time because as the intestines continues to fill. All right. So what can the intestines do to inhibit the release of these gases from the stomach? Well, there's a few factors. One, it depends on as you fill up the intestines, this duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestines, right after the stomach, as it gets larger as it fills up with chyme. It has the signals to be released, which leads to a slowing down of the process. Also, you have acidic chyme, if you have fatty chyme, if you have hypertonic chyme. So any one of these things that's kind of a weird version of chyme will come through and cause an inhibition of the gastric stuff and try and slow it down, prevent it from happening. So yeah. Also, the effects help, and so one of the main goals of these effects to try and inhibit this process is you don't want to overwhelm it, the small intestines, with having too much chyme, or if it's very acidic, it can damage it, right? So you don't want these things to take place, which wants to slow those things down. Tell them to chill out, relax, chill. And so, yeah, so there's a reflex that actually is involved with this, and it's stimulating if the duodenum has a certain pH, and it shuts off the release of gastrin, which inhibits the release of hydrochloric acid. And so intergastrones, or just any hormone that's released by the mucosa of the duodenum. And the main thing is it's trying to inhibit the movement of chyme for the system. So that's a way that you can have inhibition from the small intestines on gastric secretions. So these organs affect each other, right? One long tube, so it makes sense that there's controls on the way. It's like the stomach's moving at not quite right. The small intestines has some checks in place to prevent it from doing going crazy. So here's a cool little chart that describes all these different steps on the way. So various things that leads to inhibition and stimulatory in the three different phases where you have cephalic, gastric, and intestinal. There's events that cause stimulation of gastric juices, and there's inhibitory events of gastric juices. So hopefully this clears some things up and helps you visualize, what exactly is going on. And here's some various hormones that will have at play. It's just interesting to see some ones that play a role with these. Like, man, there's a lot of hormones here. And some have crazy names. Other ones have less crazy names. And hey, look, there's histamine. Who knew? And here's some more of those. So again, a lot of hormones involved with this process and digestion. You don't really think about it that much, right? But it's there. It's a thing. All right. So when it comes to gastric movement and emptying, so as the stomach is filling up with food, the stomach's going to stretch, right? You have all this extra crap coming in. You got to change the space, right? It's the organ of requirement if you're a Harry Potter fan. It fills with what you need it to be. And so as this happens, there's a couple factors in place that actually allow the pressure inside to stay about constant until a certain amount of food is ingested. And at that point, it's like, okay, now things are different. One of these is the receptive relaxation factor. And so this is a reflex indicated by the relaxation of smooth muscle based on swallowing in the brain. And so this allows, like, okay, we're eating food. All right, just calm it down, chill, allow it to expand, take in the space, be okay. And then there's also gastric accommodation, which is the intrinsic ability of smooth muscle to exhibit this stress relaxation response. So it allows for these organs to actually stretch without increasing tension or contracting. So smooth muscle just almost by definition can just stretch in this way, and it's fine. And then you have the body also sending some signals down. It's like, okay, relax. Just take in all this extra food and don't go crazy here. So it's got that option. Now, the stomach does contract, and so there's peristalsis involved. So remember, rhythmic contraction of muscles, and it helps move and guide food items towards the pylorus end of the stomach. And there's about 3 of these per minute that helps move it along, and there's a rhythm that helps determine this set by pacemaker cells. So who knew? Pacemaker cells are a thing here. That's one of the weirdest parts of it. And so the presence of gastrin can increase how strong these contractions are, so how many juices you have there, and also how much it's stretched. The greater the stretch, the greater the force of contraction. And so if it's doing more work, the contractions are stronger to move through it, right? It makes sense, perfectly logical. All right. And so where are the contractions most powerful? Near the end of the stomach. So right before it goes in the small intestines, that's where it's really just doing some, it's pumping away, trying to get that crap out of there. And so about 30 milliliters of chyme is produced. And so it's either going to be pushed into the duodenum at about 3 milliliters per go, or it'll just go backwards into the stomach. So for all that chyme that's there, a little bit of it going in the small intestines at a time, and the rest just kind of cycles back through the stomach until it's its turn to get out of there. And so one of the main objectives is you don't want still solid food to pass through the intestines because nothing can get absorbed by that. So you want to make sure everything is fully broken down before it enters the small intestines so you can actually absorb things. Now, obviously, it doesn't always happen, right? But that's one of the main objectives. And so we have small things pass through. You don't want anything super heavy to pass through with that. So my dog ate plastic. She had to worry about some of it was stuck in her stomach lining, causing irritation. So, and when her stomach would expand from eating, it was fine. But as it shrunk down and changed in space, it felt like she had something stuck in there. So she had a vomiting reflex that would trigger and cause it to try and get it out of her. So it's kind of interesting to see, like, the changing of like the stomach can lead to vomiting. And so eventually they would try and push that material through the system. So it was apparently small enough because she chewed up chunks to actually go into from the stomach to the small intestines and eventually get it out of there. And the reason why this says small amounts that go into the small intestines is you want to overload it. Like the main job of the small intestines is to absorb up everything it can, and you want to do that in a nice casual pace to make sure it can really spend all the time it needs to get that crap out of there. So no rush. It's essentially what it wants to do. So here's some of those movements of the stomach. So where peristalsis can play a role, moving food or the juice through. But there are some things. So how do you regulate, the emptying of it? And so the duodenum can actually control how much enters it because it doesn't want to get too full. So the duodenum has controls for that. And so how much things move through the duodenum depends on what food items are present. So if you have, a more fatty one, it can take a longer period of time. If you have more sugar-based or carbohydrate-based, it moves a little quicker. The stomach itself empties in about 4 hours from a meal. So I guess it's important to have these timelines sometimes to think about like, hey, I don't feel good. What's causing it? And you can think about like, okay, I ate that about 6 hours ago. Yeah, that could be it. I ate that an hour ago. Probably less likely. So that can be pretty helpful. Um, and so if you have a lot of fatty chyme in the duodenum, that can cause the stomach to take extra long. So it can go up to 6 hours at a time. So it can really take a while to get food out of you if it's super fatty, heavy meal. And so that's just how it can affect it. So these macromolecules can play a role. So here's another chart. It talks about everything we just kind of mentioned and different factors that can affect the stomach. So cool. So one of the things that happened, I just mentioned this earlier, was that my dog was vomiting. And so this is caused by a few factors. And so if you have extreme stretching of the stomach that it can't handle it, well, it'll regurgitate what it just ate because it can't hack it. My dog does this sometimes when she drinks water. She'll drink too much of it at once, and then she'll throw it up. And so she doesn't do it that often, but we have to yell at her. It's like, Abby, quit drinking water. And she'll stop. So, but every she comes back in, she just doesn't know any better. But it's pretty funny. We can also have other irritants, so things you may eat. So if it's a toxic food, if you have excess alcohol taking in, some spicy foods can bother folks. Other foods or medicines can cause nausea and cause vomiting. And so just any sort of irritation. Maybe you have plastic stuck inside the lining of your stomach, like my dog did, right? All those things can play a role. And so there's various impulses that lead and would trigger the part of the brain that leads to throwing up. And so that will happen. And so, excuse me, I don't know if that came through or not. That made some pizza for lunch. Again, things happen. So, just apologize for the burp. So, anyway, oh man, I'm yawning. Okay. If you vomit too much, it can lead to dehydration and lead to various imbalances inside the body, also lead to permanent damage inside the esophagus. So one of the things you should look up is look at some of the effects of vomiting and I think it's just kind of interesting to see because it's all based on structures of the system. So the esophagus is not made to deal with that, and the linings of your throat not made to deal with that. So it can cause some pretty severe effects. I've not thrown up in quite a while. I don't remember the last time I've thrown up, but I hate it. It's not a fun feeling. When was the last time I threw up? I feel like it might have been in Orlando when I had a very upset kidney because I had a kidney stone. I was in so much pain, I just threw up because that's where I was at in life. Was that? I'm pretty sure it was the last time I thrown up. I'd like to keep it that way. I've been close though. Boy, oh man, the ride Mission to Mars. I almost threw up on that ride a couple times. The various times I've eaten or drank too much water and I almost threw up. So anyway. So that was the stomach. We've covered that. Now let's look at the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. So some accessory organs that are involved with digestion. So we're going to look at those. Small intestines are in part 3. Okay. So the liver, gallbladder, pancreas, all accessory, and they're all have more connections with the liver than, with the small intestines. So the liver, it's one of its main jobs is to make bile, and bile makes fats easier to deal with. The gallbladder stores bile, so it's a friend, and it makes sense. It's right hanging out near the liver. And then you have the pancreas. And so the pancreas has enzymes needed to break down chyme further, and has some bicarbonate that it makes that helps deal with the acidity from the stomach. So you have more structures designed to deal with various issues from the stomach. It's like, okay, we got to break these things down, got to deal with some of the products that are coming through, we have to deal with the acidity that's coming through. Right, so we want to break things down into building blocks so it can be used. That helps here. and also make sure we don't just damage the intestines in the way. So with the liver, let's look at this thing. It's the largest gland in the body, so it weighs about 3 pounds. So that's a heck of a liver. We've seen the livers in animals, right? They're huge. There's 4 lobes to it. There's the alimentum, right, that connects to the stomach. Some arteries and veins that enter the liver at the specific spots. So that's a thing. And so then you also have the bile ducts, and so there's a couple of these. There's one that leaves the actual liver, one that connects to the gallbladder, and then the bile duct itself, which is where you have those 2 ducts formed together. And so you actually kind of see it in the picture there. And so the bile duct will actually empty into the small intestines, and there's one duct that comes from the gallbladder, one duct that comes from the liver. And so with the actual one thing that comes up is another fun fact is sharks. Sharks have massive livers. So in sharks, one of the things they also will make is oils to help them stay afloat in the water so they don't sink to the bottom. So they have an excess oil production. So sharks have massive livers. I kid you not, massive livers to help make this. And so it just helps them stay in the water. So who knew, right? They have such crazy ones. And so the hepatic artery actually goes through and carries oxygenated blood to keep it around. And then the hepatic vein enters the liver, right? And so this is one that will go through and help feed the liver with blood for it to filter through and deal with. All right, so there's our liver. It's kind of ugly as an organ, but it's just, if you want to look at it, this is it. You don't have to know too much else about it. One of the functions. And then here's the other picture where it shows you some of the other structures. So you see the gallbladder, bile duct, etc. So, liver lobules. So to really understand the liver functions, we have to look at the micro side of the liver, so some microanatomy of the liver. And so these liver lobules are these little hexagon type structures. You can see them in these pictures on the right, these are the functional units of the liver. And so they have liver cells called hepatocytes, and these cells' main job is to filter out the blood that's passing through and process it. So a lot of the blood that comes into here comes from the small intestines, so it's actually deoxygenated venous blood, and it enters in and it's full of nutrients that the small intestines absorb from the food. And so these cells help process that. And there's a vein, and you can see that in the middle, that's located in the middle of this whole structure. The central vein is located in the middle of the liver lobules. The portal triad, you gotta know what the portal triad is, it's found in each corner of one of these hexagonal structures, and it's got a few parts to it. It's got an hepatic artery to it. It's got the hepatic portal vein, which is the one that's actually involved with bringing in the nutrient-rich blood from the intestines. The hepatic artery supplies oxygen to keep this living tissue alive, these living cells alive, and then you have the bile duct, which deals with bile. So within this structure, you actually have the cells that go through and make bile. And so the bile canaliculi are actually carrying the bile made from the liver cells and then carrying that down to the bile ducts to be released from the liver. Some go to the gallbladder to be stored, others go right to the small intestines. So here is the liver lobules. So you can actually see these individual little segments to it. And so, yeah, not too bad. And then here's the shark liver I mentioned. So I figured I'd get you a picture in there so you could actually see what this joker looks like. And boom, it's there. So it's a heck of a liver. So fun facts. Okay, so more with the liver. There are liver sinusoids, which are capillaries that leak, right? Like, I mean, I guess kind of a lot of capillaries leak, but these are ones that are found between these different hepatic plates. And so what happens here, these spots are you have hepatic portal vein and hepatic artery vein coming from these areas from the triads, and they go through the sinusoids and empty the central vein. So this blood kind of leaks out and gets filtered through the surface of the liver cells, and so they take in the oxygen, take in some nutrients to filter it out, make sure everything's good, and then dump it in the central vein where it'll lead the liver, and then go to the heart, and so it can be distributed throughout the body. There's also macrophages found inside of here because the liver is dealing with some risky stuff, right? It's on the front lines. It's taking in some blood from the intestines. Who knows what it's got in there? So you got to get rid of some excess crap that's getting passed through, and any sort of like old red blood cells too, because you have some red blood cells carrying oxygen, or that were carrying oxygen. It's this thing's looking a little rough. All right, tear it down, tear it apart, and so they can. So yeah, that's some of the things that happens there. The liver dumps together, and so you can actually see it in this picture. So you can actually see the sinusoids and where they're found. And so blood from both spots, the hepatic portal vein and the hepatic artery, will mix together, travel down those pathways, keep those cells alive, supply them with oxygen, supply them with nutrients. The cells will do what they do and filter these things out. They'll also have to make bile. The bile will get drained, go out the bile duct, and then go on out. So the liver does a ton of stuff in each one of these little segments. So this is the main operating center of the liver. So all the cool liver stuff that happens, all done here. And so yeah, you can see the macrophages kind of dancing around trying to get some stuff out and say, "Oh, you do not belong. Get out of my house." So just tear it up. So I like the way this works. I think this is pretty neat. I like the structure here. So this infinite, or not infinite, but this small little precise detail. And so these little cells operating, and it's just all this blood pooling together, I don't know. It just seems kind of neat. Then it drains out the hepatic central vein. So it's important for you to understand like the blood flow through the system. So how does things pass through? What's going on? What's the functions of this system? So why does it matter? What's being made? What's being processed? Whatever. So let's sum up this hepatic portal so we get it down. So the portal triad has blood from the intestines and oxygenated blood. So there's two different arteries. There's an artery, there's a vein. They carry those things. And you also have blood that's going to be carried near the hepatocytes and the sinusoids, which are these special capillaries, and it mixes together. So at this point, those two blood supplies mix together, and then the oxygenated blood gets deoxygenated as the cells take in the oxygen, and the nutrient-rich blood, some of those nutrients get absorbed, the rest will stay in it, but then also gets filtered to make sure nothing dangerous. So if you have, again, like medications, those are, playing a role here, so they can be absorbed by the liver, be activated or deactivated, it depends. And then they'll eventually send it away. And so I always kind of think about the liver as kind of like a money launderer, right? And so it's taking in some blood, it's filtering it, it's processing it, and making it clean, right? And then it takes a cut for itself. It's like, all right, we have 100% nutrients coming in. I'll take 20% of that, and the rest of yours is 80. It's clean, it's good. Take and get out of here. Moves on and does its job. That's how I was thinking about the liver as a money launderer. Yeah, it's kind of odd. But then blood will leave via the central vein, and then it'll go back to the heart, where it can be, recirculated throughout. So go back to, lungs, all that kind of stuff. And then the hepatocytes, they also make and release bile, which is going to enter the gastrointestinal tract, which will then, help out the small intestines. And remember, the bile duct is the third part of the triad, of the hepatic triad. Also important, bile and blood go in opposite direction. Blood's coming in, bile's going out, right? So two different things. All right, so we talked about the hepatocytes before, and so these are liver cells. They produce almost a liter of bile a day collectively, which is pretty impressive. That's a lot of bile being made. And they also help process any sort of nutrients that we carrying in blood. And so remember, liver can store sugar, and so it can actually store glucose as glycogen, which is kind of neat. It can also store various vitamins that get taken in, and it can form detoxification. So it can convert some chemicals to a more safer byproduct to get out of the body. So liver can break down alcohol that's been absorbed and tries to, get it out of there. So it's the reason why you may see a lot of, damaged livers in some folks with alcohol abuse. Can very much be a thing. Hepatocytes are specialized cells. They have a lot of endoplasmic reticulum, because that's what endoplasmic reticulum is involved with. They also have peroxisomes dealing with bad things, a Golgi apparatus, because, they're involved with shipping stuff out, and the mitochondria for energy use. What's actually kind of cool is Captain America. In the movies, it's actually mentioned this, but he has such an advanced metabolism that he breaks everything down super fast, and so nothing really affects him. So, like, before there's like, a slowing down process in us of like, it takes a while to deal with the effects of like something like alcohol, but in Captain America, his metabolism is so high, everything functions so well, he doesn't have to worry about it. So that's kind of cool. So it's just like drinking water, essentially, for him. So that's very unusual. Okay, bile. So bile is this kind of a yellow greenish type thing. It's alkaline, so it's to counteract the acidic effects of the stomach. There are some salts involved with this, and so these play a role in breaking down and absorbing fats. And then you have bilirubin, which is a pigment that is formed from heme. So remember, broken down blood. We've talked about this before. And so bacteria break this thing down, gives it brown color, and that color is the color of feces. So boom, there you go. Share it with your parents, friends, family, loved ones, or just people you know on the internet, and I'll let them know. Now you know some stuff. You can explain something very basic. And then it also has cholesterol and some of the other structures in it as well. So bile is composed of a few things. And so but you need it for actually absorbing of fats and breaking things down, and also absorbing fat soluble vitamins, which some of them can be. All right. And so with bile, there's actually a mechanism to conserve those bile salts. And so most of the bile salts are recycled, so you don't have to make that many. So the body's pretty good at reabsorbing things that it needs to. So it doesn't have to make a ton. Again, body's cheap. And so if there's any sort of imbalance of the liver, you can have like hepatitis. And so it's be usually caused by a virus of some kind, but there's a variety of different types of hepatitis. It could be ranged from like less serious to extremely serious. You can have cirrhosis, where you have chronic inflammation due to either long-term hepatitis or alcoholism. Liver transplants can be successful, but livers are unfortunately not super common. The liver can regenerate to its full size, so I mean, I guess it's kind of makes sense. I mean, I feel like we could just throw some out there. I don't know. I don't know what's involved with that whole thing, but it can regrow, which is good, I suppose. But yeah, I have milkshakes here because I just think milkshakes are cool. And it says, talking about some serious stuffs here. So why not throw in a little milkshake action? I love cookies and cream milkshakes. Oh, so good. Man, that hits the spot. I wish I had a cookies and cream milkshake right now, but I do not. Actually, I don't have any cookies and cream ice cream either. So I really can't even make one. I'm pretty devastated right now by that development. I have whipped cream though. Big whoop. Alright, the gallbladder. This stupid thing. What's it for? Well, the gallbladder is a little sac. It stores bile. And helps concentrate it, so absorb some water and some ions to do so. It has a lot of folds, allows it to expand and hold that bile, because it's its main job. Hopefully, it has adaptations to actually hold stuff in. And so there are various contractions along the way, and so those will lead to the release of that bile to the cystic duct, which flows into the bile duct. So yeah, that's what it does. Okay, gallbladder. You can make gallstones. So its main job is just to store bile, but even that can go wrong. So man, what a worthless organ. And so these gallstones can obstruct the flow of bile from the gallbladder. It can be very painful. And so sometimes you can have sharp crystals in there, and that can cause some issues. The blockage can cause jaundice, and so it can cause a buildup of some various things inside the blood. And so that's not good. Because jaundice can also indicate liver failure. So you need to figure out the cause of your jaundice. And then one of the treatments for gallstones is removing the gallstone itself, or the gallbladder itself, or breaking down the crystals of the gallstones, or just doing sort of ultrasound vibration therapy. And a lot of these are actually pretty commonly used in kidney stones too, honestly. My mom had gallstones, and she had them removed. So she had her gallbladder removed about the summer of 2004. And I remember that she had like a lot of back pain, and she had no idea why. It turns out it's because she had a ton of gallstones in her. My grandfather had the same thing. You can live fine without it. You just don't have bile stored up anymore. But I mean, luckily the liver can just make bile. I mean, that's the main organ, so you can do fine without it for sure. But yeah, it's just interesting. So lasers can also be used to vaporize things, and then in the James Bond film Moonraker. There's actually lasers that are fired off to break apart stuff too, so it's kind of dumb, but it's there. Also, if you wonder where the names for these lectures have been coming from, they're coming from plays on James Bond film names, so hopefully people have picked that up, but who knows. Alright, the pancreas. talked about the pancreas before. Remember, it had endocrine functions, so it's kind of like a cool old friend we get to come back to one more time, and then it dies on you in a cave, and it's like, well, okay, uh, but yeah, but luckily the pancreas should still be around. It's in the greater curvature of the stomach, and its main job here is to make pancreatic juice. All right, so what's in pancreatic juice, you may wonder? A bunch of stuff. So a lot of water, also basics to it, so very alkaline. Again, want to deal with the acidity of the stomach. So you have a juice that helps deal with that to counteract it. Electrolytes, yay, sodium, potassium. Also enzymes, so all four of them this time around. So the pancreas tends to be pretty important when it helps breaking down items inside the small intestine. So if you think your pancreas lately, probably not. You should do it because it helps with all that. There's a cute little pancreas. There's like a dinosaur tongue or something, dinosaur tail just hanging off the small intestines. It's a tough thing to find in dissections, but don't worry, you should have seen it uh, at some point. But yeah, okay. So all right, so the bile duct and pancreatic duct, they actually unite together and they'll fuse and become the hepatic pancreatic structure. So it's called that because it can unite, things from the liver and things from the pancreas together in one spot. And there's a sphincter that's involved in controlling the release of those items. So the pancreas stuff, the bile stuff, all that gets controlled by this specific sphincter, and it allows it to enter into the duodenum. So you can see the diagram labeled there, and actually see where it's labeled. There's also a smaller duct that will allow the pancreas to enter directly into the duodenum. All right. How do you regulate this crap when getting released? So the bile and the pancreas. So how do you control where it goes and when it goes? Well, the bile and the pancreatic juice. It deals with nerves and hormones. I mean, it's kind of the common theme, right? So nervous system comes around, helps control it, and doesn't. If you think about it, sympathetic, it's going to cause it to slow down. Pancreas causes it to speed. The parasympathetic causes it to speed up, right? I mean, that makes sense. Rest, digest versus the other one, fight or flight. Also, some hormones. OCCK. We saw that earlier in this table. That plays a role. And so it ramps up the process of breaking things down. So it'll lead to more of these, keep up secretion, and it'll increase the output of the pancreas. And secretin will also, it'll deal with bile output as well. So both of these will increase it. And so other things, bile is released at various points, and when you have the circulation returning a lot of bile salts, it'll go through and release some more bile that's been released. If secretin is around, that'll still the gallbladder to release its junk and actually do its job. And the hepatic sphincter is closed. This will affect the bile and pancreatic secretions regulation, and so that'll cause bile to be increased if that's the case, unless digestion is active. If it's active, well, then it won't be increased. And so bile is stored in the gallbladder and released to small intestines only when it's contracted to do so. All right, and this is the last one. We're done. The next one should be shorter. Yeah. So here you can see a nice overall process. So he goes through and talks about the secretion and release of biopancreatic juice. So you can see how it can be controlled, some of the processes involved. You don't have to go too in depth with ever explaining. There's just some of the ways it's controlled, how you affect it, what would happen if we tweak some of these basic elements to it, and how it affected. So get good handle on the basis of it. But I'm kind of have to write like a 3-page essay on this or something like that. That's crazy. But anyway, that's it for digestive part 2. We got one left. That'll be the end of the digestive system, and then that'll be it for the week. For our new lecture content, anyway. Also got that lecture test on Monday. Hopefully you did well. Wait, that's upcoming Monday. Sorry. So also, this will be on the test next week. So study up, study hard. Hope you're not waiting until Sunday to watch these, because it'll be kind of rough.